Story 1. So, this happened in 2018 when I graduated high school. A quick overview of the Swiss school system. Normally, you go to school until 9th grade. If you want to go to university later, you change to grammar high school from 8th to 12th grade. I decided to study and went to high school. Also, in Switzerland, my state canton at least, everything under 75% is a fail. We have a really strict thing going on there. There I quickly became friends with Chelsea, my now girlfriend, and Alicia. Alicia is the kind of person that is funny if you don't have her around too much. She is always the victim. She can only talk about herself, etc. But if you spend too much time with her, you are a mess. She is also never responsible for things happening to her because she grew up in the foster care system, whatever. So, this happened about 2 months before our finals. Now, graduating means passing the finals, obviously. But not only them. The finals are half of your eventual grade. The other half is your last report card. If I had an A in my final English exam, but a C in my last report card, my eventual grade would be a B, and so on. Alicia really struggled with that because her last report card wasn't that good. She had to excel in most of the subjects to graduate. So you would think she'd write as many notes as possible and study pretty early, right? Nope. She procrastinated until 2 months before our finals, while I and Chelsea studied our butts off. Now, I was always the girl who offered her notes in our class group chat in case someone was interested. This gets important later. We had a fairly long list of things we had to be able to use in math, and I wrote notes for every single topic and kept it in a folder in my locker. Only put some of them on the group chat, just when someone was asking about a certain topic. One day, I went to my locker, and they weren't there. I was freaking out. I spent weeks writing them. I looked for them for an entire week and had approximately 3 panic attacks because I thought I wouldn't pass now and had to do all of it again. That's when Alicia casually told me that she took them the other day when I asked her to get a book from my locker. She actually hadn't planned to tell me at all because it's not like you'd need them anyway. You had them long enough. If you didn't make copies, it's not my fault. The blatant entitlement was enough for me to come up with a plan. A vicious plan. Not only had she stolen my notes. If I hadn't bothered her so much with it, she wouldn't have even told me she had taken them. She was only a high school friend anyway, and I knew I'd never do anything with her again once we graduated. So frankly, I didn't give a single crap about what would happen to her. Her entitled, self-centered way was enough for me to finally burst. I apologized for making drama. It's okay, you just are like that. Sometimes I was about to lose it and just continued my school day. Now, Alicia kept calling me about notes, etc., even before that, especially my notes for various books. She'd chosen the same books so she didn't have to study extra. I started to give her a wrong analysis and started to fake notes. Obvious enough to figure out they were wrong if she'd think herself, but not too obvious. If she'd read the books, she'd know it's nonsense. I did the same with our English books. And French. She already had my math notes, so I couldn't fake those. But I could fake German, French, English, chemistry, physics, and psychology. Now, after I invested so much time in faking notes, I watched it all go down a day before graduation. We went into a pub with our teacher to watch a football game. I don't even remember, and she distributed our results. I passed with a 5.38 in Switzerland. The grades are from 1-6. 6 is best, so about an A? And Alicia went pale. 3.21D. She had failed all of her classes but math and psychology. Oops. It seems she really just read my notes. She didn't read the books she was supposed to read. She didn't read our textbooks. I had to hide a grin. My girlfriend thinks to this day it was cruel, but seriously, it was a damper for her entitlement and narcissism. From what I've heard, she is currently trying to repeat the year and try again, hopefully without stealing her friend's notes. Edit. Many are asking me, and no, I don't regret it. To pass her finals, she had to study and read her French, German, and English books. The task was not to just read the notes and nonsense her way through them. The language finals, the books at least, were done orally. If she had read the books, she would have known my notes were not correct. So honestly, it's her fault. Story 2. So this didn't happen to me, but to a friend of mine who worked in a different department than me. Essentially what the title says. This supervisor came into the department and was one of those who wanted to make a bunch of unnecessary changes and implement a host of tedious rules. He would write people up for being a minute late, for performing the job in a way he didn't like, for breathing the wrong direction, etc. You get the idea. Anyways, the department he came into was staffed by very senior members who had been there so long our company has a union that they are all a part of. They were making more than him per hour. They have been through their share of crappy supervisors, just part of the job at the company we're at. Most of the supervisors are bad, because most of them are fairly young, and this is their first big boy job, even if it is blue collar. They just kept their heads down and did the work since none of them can afford to leave. Since these guys have been there so long, they immediately noticed when their pay stubs were smaller than before. The supervisor was paying them for an hour less than what they actually worked. Every single day they worked. A lot of these guys are making 20-hour or more, so that's 5 hours a week, ending up at about $400 a month less that they were being paid. Of course they were going to notice. I seriously have no idea how this supervisor thought he could get away with it. These guys, having worked together for so long, immediately came up with a plan. They decided to keep quiet. Let him continue shorting them until the moment was right. As they knew the company would be forced to pay them the missing time, some of it was overtime too, as well as a settlement to keep it out of court if they played their cards right. So they waited. They kept putting up with his crappy rules and attitude and said nothing. They knew the supervisor was trying to get promoted, which was why he had been moved to their department in the first place. By underpaying, then he made himself look more productive with fewer hours needed. Of course, this made him look like a better candidate. He kept up the annoying rules and jerk attitude the whole time, which only made the revenge even sweeter. Everyone in the company knew he wanted the promotion that was coming up. He wouldn't shut up about it. In the break room, the office, everywhere, he told anyone who looked remotely alive and how he just knew he was going to get it. 7 months went by and the supervisor got promoted, just like he said. That's the moment they chose to come forward, and it couldn't have played more perfectly in their favor. Our company uses a time clock system, and each employee has a badge they use to clock in. The supervisor finalizes the time cards in the computer, and absolutely everything is tracked. Essentially, this supervisor was deleting their punch-in and starting them up an hour later every day for 7 months. Now with our system, you can't just delete punches. You have to add comments because, like I said, everything is tracked. So this sup would put nonsense notes like 1234 or some other gibberish to get it through. Every department supervisor also has to keep track of a physical binder that records what the startup time for that night was supposed to be, so that if there is any issue they can reference the book. So when these guys came forward, it took less than 10 minutes of digging to pull up everything and see just how badly he had screwed up. There was screaming, crying, and a lot of apologies from the supervisor, but the damage was done. The supervisor was immediately fired, and now all the guys he screwed over are getting back pay, plus overtime and a settlement. They didn't disclose how much, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was several thousand. Story 3. Hi everyone. Long-time lurker 25, male, and finally wanted to share my first post and experience with Karen. This happened 2 years ago, so I'll try to recall the details as best I can. So for some background info, it was the summer of 2019 in the US. I had just graduated from my master's program and returned home to work a summer job before my first real job. I had been working as a lifeguard at a fitness club with both an indoor and an outdoor pool and had been promoted to pool manager for this summer. I was looking for one last shift before my new job started, and it happened to be Labor Day at the outdoor pool. Cue the Emperor's New Groove, Bring It On meme. In addition, we also have an on-duty manager to respond to any requests if someone in the fitness or pool areas needs extra assistance. On this day, the club closed its indoor pool, a 6-lane lap pool, for the day. Front desk employees were referring members to either the outdoor pool or another local pool for lap or free swim time. Our outdoor pool was in an L shape, with a pretty understandable setup. One end of the L was a shallow end, with a slanted entrance flush to the pool deck. This led into a 5-foot zone for advanced swimmers and a 9-foot deep end, with cones showing areas for kids to jump in. Just beside these two sections were 4-5 lap lanes running the length of the pool. Being the opening manager, I went through the routine of checking chemical levels, setting up umbrellas and chairs, and organizing the lifeguard rotations. When it came to setting up lane lines in swimming zones, knowing our indoor pool was closed, I decided to add one more lap lane to account for the larger volume of lap swimmers. This ended up slightly shrinking the area for the deep end where kids could jump in, but still giving them enough room to enjoy the deep end. Readers, I think you can see where this is going. So the front gates open, and the summer flood of kids, parents, and lap swimmers comes in. I was stationed at our first aid manager's table, watching the pool deck, and everything was going great until I heard her. Yes, you know her, and you love her. The call of a Karen, a woman in her 40s, was talking with one of the lifeguards and seemed very upset about the experience her kids and their friends were having. Then I heard the phrase we all love, "I want to speak to your manager." I groan a bit on the inside and walk over to see what's going on. What follows is a paraphrased chat between me and Karen. "Hi, I'm Byleth. Can I help you with something?" Finally, someone in charge. "Why did you change the lane lines today? My kids don't have enough room to jump into the pool. You need to change them back." "I'm sorry you're upset about the situation. We're expecting a larger volume of lap swimmers today, so we are adding one lane to compensate for that. If you look, though, your kids still have room to jump in and enjoy the deep end." "Are you kidding me? What's wrong with the indoor pool? Why can't these people go swim in there? I brought my kids and their friends here today to enjoy one of their last days before school, and you're ruining it. Go change them back, now." I look over at her kids in the deep end. The area is a little crowded, but they still seem to be enjoying themselves. "Again, I'm sorry you're upset, but we chose this setup because the indoor pool is closed. The front desk has been referring people to either here or some of the other local pools for lap swim time. I can't control where they choose to go, but again, we chose this to account for the larger crowd we are expecting today." As someone with social anxiety, I was trying to put on a brave face during this chat. It is the first time I've had a confrontation with a patron, let alone a Karen. I was trying to hold it together on the outside, but on the inside, I was stressing like crazy. After listening to my calm reasoning for the pool setup another 3 times, and after a few threats from knowing the CEO, Karen has decided she's had enough. In front of me, she pulls out her phone and calls the front desk of the fitness center, asking for a manager to come down and help with an incompetent manager. At that same time, I pull out my walkie-talkie and ask Seedith, the on-manager, to come down and help. Seedith arrives maybe 5 minutes later, and the 3 of us step outside the gate to explain our sides of the story. I try to calmly explain to Seedith why we changed the setup of the pool to the way it is now, but Karen jumps in and interrupts me. She spells out how her kids are having their summertime fun taken away by crammed pool space, and that not only should I change the lines back, but I should also be fired. Seedith sends her back into the pool area to talk with me privately outside. He explains that Karen is one of the fitness center's donors and says that for the sake of keeping her happy and preventing a scene, we should change the lane lines back to their original positions, which is a process that takes about 5 minutes and 1 extra guard to hold each side of the lane line. Together, Seedith and I change the lane lines back, which opens more of the deep end space, and we receive a standing ovation from the nearby families and teens. I feel absolutely defeated and publicly embarrassed that Karen got her way, even if it was one of my last shifts there. The flip side of this story, however, is that the aquatics supervisor arrived an hour or 2 later to take over my manager's shift. Before he clocked in, I pulled him aside, and he asked to explain what happened. He asked questions to make sure he understood clearly, and I subtly pointed out Karen to him across the deck. He thanked me for telling him and assured me I had done everything right in that situation. He said he would take things over from here and go enjoy the rest of the weekend. In addition, I was pulled aside by one of the executives of the club, who happened to be swimming in the lap lanes. She also thanked me for handling the situation the way I did and reassured me that I had done everything right. There were no fights, arrests, or other crazy blow-ups, but it still made for one crazy, entitled Karen Encounter. Story 4. Hello, everyone. Gather around, and let me tell you about the wildest night of my life, featuring my friend's entitled dad. It all started quite innocently. My buddy Jake invited me to join him and his family for a late dinner at a cozy diner in town. It was one of those classic places with neon signs and booths that had seen better days, but still had a certain charm. Little did I know that a storm was brewing, and we were about to get swept right into it. There we were, Jake and I, enjoying our burgers and fries when the quiet night took a sudden turn. Enter Mr. Entitled himself, Jake's dad, Gary. Gary was the kind of guy who thought the world owed him a favor, and he wasn't shy about making that known. As the clock struck 10:30 p.m., the waitress politely informed us that the kitchen was closing. It seemed like no big deal, right? Wrong. Gary took it as a personal insult, as if the entire universe was out to deny him a late-night snack. "What do you mean you're closing?" he bellowed, his face turning a shade of red I didn't think was possible. "We're paying customers, and we deserve to be served." I exchanged a glance with Jake, who just shook his head in embarrassment. I could tell this wasn't the first time his dad had acted this way. The poor waitress, a young girl with braces and a name tag that read Samantha, nervously responded, "I'm sorry, sir, but the kitchen closes at 10:30. It's our policy." Gary slammed his fist on the table, causing nearby patrons to look over. "Your policy? I don't care about your policy. I want a steak, and I want it now." Samantha, clearly flustered, tried to keep calm. "I can check if there's anything left, but you'll need to order quickly." Gary scoffed. "Well, you better make it quick, sweetheart. My time is valuable." I couldn't believe his audacity. Jake gave me an apologetic look as if to say, "Welcome to my world." As Samantha hurried to the kitchen, Gary turned to Jake and me with a smug grin. "That's how you get things done, boys. Assert yourself. They'll learn to respect you." I tried to stay calm. "Gary, isn't it easier to just follow the rules like everyone else?" He chuckled, a deep, dismissive laugh. "Rules are for people who can't get what they want. I make my own rules." Soon enough, Samantha returned with a weary smile. "I managed to convince the chef to make one last steak for you, sir. But please, this is an exception." Gary smirked. "Exception? I don't need your charity. Just get me my steak." The diner's atmosphere grew tense, like the calm before a storm. As Gary basked in his so-called victory, I couldn't help but feel sorry for the hard-working staff caught in the middle of his entitlement. Minutes later, Samantha brought out Gary's precious steak. He inspected it as if he were a king examining a gift and grunted in approval before digging in like he owned the place. Jake and I exchanged glances, rolling our eyes. We were just hoping to finish our meals in peace and get out of this awkward situation. But fate had other plans. As Gary devoured his steak, the diner's manager approached our table. A tall, stern-looking man with a no-nonsense demeanor. He introduced himself as Mr. Thompson. "Is everything to your satisfaction, sir?" he asked Gary, his tone neutral but firm. Gary wiped his mouth with a napkin and sneered. "Well, it would be if your kitchen staff knew how to cook a steak properly in the first place." Mr. Thompson nodded, staying composed. "I apologize for any inconvenience. However, I must inform you that the diner will be closing in 15 minutes. We appreciate your understanding." Gary, never one to appreciate anything, slammed his fork down. "Closing? You people are unbelievable. I demand you keep this place open for me. I'm a paying customer. Mr. Thompson held his ground. I'm sorry, sir, but we have closing hours for the comfort of our staff and to maintain smooth operations. We can't make exceptions. That's when Gary's entitled rage hit its peak. You can't make exceptions? Do you know who I am? I'll have your job for this, he shouted, drawing everyone's attention. Mr. Thompson remained calm, though I could see the irritation in his eyes. I'm afraid that won't be possible, sir. I suggest you finish your meal and leave peacefully. But Gary wasn't about to back down. He stood up, knocking over his chair, and pointed a finger at Mr. Thompson. You'll regret this. I'll make sure you never work in this town again. By this point, Jake and I were ready to disappear from sheer embarrassment. The whole diner was silent, with everyone watching the scene unfold. Mr. Thompson, unfazed, reached for the phone behind the counter. I'm calling the police if you don't leave immediately, sir. Gary laughed, a menacing chuckle that sent shivers down my spine. Call the police? Go ahead. I'd like to see them try to remove me. And so, Mr. Thompson dialed the number, and the tension in the air grew thick. Gary, confident in his own invincibility, leaned against the counter with a smug grin. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived, both with stern expressions, ready to restore order. Mr. Thompson calmly explained the situation, detailing Gary's refusal to leave and the disturbance he had caused. The officers approached Gary, who was still smirking as if he held the upper hand. Sir, you need to leave the premises immediately. Refusing to do so may result in your arrest. Gary scoffed. Arrest? For what? Wanting a meal at a so-called diner. One officer replied, for trespassing and causing a disturbance. Please cooperate. But Gary wasn't about to go quietly. He pushed the officer's hand away and yelled, You can't arrest me. I know my rights. The second officer moved in, handcuffs at the ready. Sir, you're under arrest. Please comply, or we'll have to use force. Gary, in his delusional state, swung a wild punch at the officer. It connected with a loud thud, and chaos ensued. The once peaceful diner became a scene of shouting, scuffling, and overturned chairs. Jake and I grabbed our belongings, hoping to slip away unnoticed, but we were too late. The whole spectacle had caught the officers' attention, who were now fully engaged in dealing with Gary's resistance. As we reached the door, just about to escape, Gary spotted us and shouted, You too, you're witnesses. Tell them they can't arrest me. I shook my head, muttering to Jake, Let's get out of here before we're dragged into this mess. And so, we left the diner, with the chaos echoing behind us. As we stepped into the cool night air, I felt a mix of relief and disbelief at the absurdity of the situation. The next day, Jake told me that Gary spent the night in a holding cell, facing charges of trespassing, disturbing the peace, and assaulting a police officer. Story 5. I was raised in a devout Roman Catholic family that sent my siblings and me to Catholic-run schools from kindergarten through high school. For this story to make sense, a basic understanding of Catholic religious doctrine is needed, so I'll keep it brief. Catholics practice something called the Sacrament of Holy Confession. The belief is that if you confess your sins to a priest and truly repent, the priest has the power to forgive your sins in the eyes of God. Most churches have confessionals for this purpose. While some newer ones are small rooms with chairs, the classic confessional is like a small closet, with a priest sitting in a closet next to you, separated by a privacy screen. Confession usually takes place after the morning Mass, where one or more priests set up in the confessional, and congregants go in one by one to say their confessions. Now, the bond of the confessional is considered absolutely sacred within the Church, similar to lawyer-client privilege. A priest is never supposed to share anything they learn in the confessional or act on any information they hear. Some priests have even faced execution by their government for refusing to testify about what they heard in confession. If a priest is found to have broken this bond, he could be defrocked, essentially removed from the priesthood, and might even be excommunicated, which means being excluded from the entire church and shunned by any devout Catholic. This policy is so strict that even if priests later learn the same information through normal means, they are not allowed to act on it, to avoid giving the impression of breaking the bond of the confessional. This part is important. In my sophomore year, our Catholic high school came under the administration of the Salesians, a religious order of brothers and monks dedicated to educating children. Our new principal was a Salesian priest who began holding daily Mass in our campus chapel every morning before classes. He encouraged attendance, though it didn't quite catch on. Usually, only one or two devout teachers and an occasional particularly religious student attended. Then, one Monday morning, right after homeroom, we heard the announcement over the public address system. Will the following students report to the principal's office immediately? This announcement usually signaled that students were about to be disciplined for some weekend antics. At this private school, we could indeed be punished for things that happened outside school grounds. For instance, if someone had thrown a large party and a parent found out, they might call the school, and those involved would get disciplined. This sparked an idea in my mind. The following Monday morning, I attended Mass, bright and early. I was first in line to enter the confessional afterward. I sat with Father Jim and confessed, in great detail, all the trouble my friends and I had gotten into over the weekend, where we went, who did what, and to whom. I covered everything. The first time, he seemed surprised, gave me some acts of contrition, said the absolution, and sent me on my way. I think at first, he felt pleased with himself, thinking, I'm really reaching these kids. But I'm pretty sure that by mid-semester, he caught on to what I was doing. Every now and then, he'd make a sly comment or crack a smile, but he couldn't stop me. By confessing everything we did over the weekend to our principal first thing on Monday, I put all that information within the bonds of the confessional. Anything I told him there, Father Jim would never be able to act on without risking serious consequences. If he later received a message from one of my friend's parents about us being caught behaving recklessly, he could thank them for the information. But he couldn't punish us because I'd already told him everything in the confessional 20 minutes earlier. This practice continued all the way through senior year and served my friends and me well. Others seemed to catch on, too, because by the time I graduated, the Monday Mass sessions were well attended. Father Jim even had to start earlier to accommodate all the confessions before classes. Looking back, I'm not sure who was more guilty of malicious compliance here. Did we manipulate him by going to confession for our own motives? Or did he outsmart us by encouraging us to attend Mass and confession regularly? After all, in just 2 years, he somehow managed to get dozens of high school students to start attending Mass before class and going to confession every week. Perhaps it was a win-win situation. Story 6. The story takes place in the latter half of 2022 in the United Kingdom. Names and companies have been changed or left out due to confidentiality agreements and the company's strict approach. Part 1. The issue begins. During this time, I worked at a major tourist attraction that welcomed thousands of visitors each day. Part of the attraction was outdoors, and an area had been expanded to add new sections. To match the theme of the new section, a fresh brick pavement was installed in this area. However, upper management often didn't plan things thoroughly, and this instance was no different. They decided not to install an anti-slip surface on the brick pavement, though it was summer, an unusually dry one at that our region regularly experiences rain, snow, and frost, especially as the seasons change. We expressed our concerns to upper management, explaining the need for an anti-slip surface, but our feedback went unheard. When winter arrived, it brought not only cold, but also plenty of rain, making up for the dry autumn. The winter of 2022 was particularly harsh for the United Kingdom, with temperatures dropping to single digits and even below 0 in Celsius. A layer of frost permanently settled on the brick pavement, setting the stage for some well-timed compliance. Part 2. The compliance. The first slips and falls gave us an idea. The company required us to fill out physical accident and incident reports for any mishaps. Now, anyone who has worked at tourist attractions knows that we often see children fall simply from excitement. Typically, we check if there's any injury, and if all is well, we carry on, avoiding paperwork. Additionally, since upper management didn't appreciate us being in their offices, where the paper forms were located, we had to walk a long way to get them, then find someone to cover our position while we completed the report. Upper management strongly disliked us being in their special offices instead of interacting with guests. Our lower and middle managers understood the situation, as they too recognized the impracticality of upper management's policies. So, they saw what we were doing and supported it. What happened was that every single slip outside on the makeshift ice rink of a pavement was reported. This meant about 15-20 minutes in a warm office, filling out reports on each identical fall, all in plain view of upper management. I suspect they began working from home more often due to our presence there. One of our lower managers, a friend, shared that the stack of reports reaching upper management was measurable in inches. I'm not ashamed to say I was one of the top contributors. Part 3. The minimal response. Upper management finally started to take action to resolve the issue. They put up temporary, unattractive barriers around most of the brick pavement and laid down anti-slip mats on paths leading to key parts of the attraction. They thought they had solved the problem. We knew better. Anyone who has worked with tourists knows that they can be challenging. If told not to touch important items, they will touch them. If reminded to keep an eye on their children, they will let them roam. These barriers, which were meant to be respected, simply encouraged tourists to think, "These don't apply to me." Each time we asked people not to go under the barriers, they looked confused. And since the barriers were just low enough, children would slip under them, run straight onto the icy pavement, and fall. More accident and incident reports piled up as a result, and all upper management did was tell us low-wage workers to do a better job of managing this section. Part 4. The wake-up call. Then came the school kids. While we didn't mind the little ones, teenagers were another matter. Young children, between 5 and 10 years old, were usually delightful. The teachers who brought them along followed our guidelines, which made our jobs easier, so we were genuinely more concerned for them. Our worst fears came true when a report came in about a 7-year-old boy who had slipped on the ice, likely while playing with classmates. Unfortunately, he chipped his 2 front teeth in the fall, leading to a call for our on-site first aid team to help with the bleeding. Thankfully, he seemed all right beyond that, though the tooth fairy likely paid double that night. For us, including lower and middle management, it was the final straw. I wish I had taken a picture of that particular accident and incident report. It had more co-signatures than any other. Part 5. The fallout. Nobody wants a lawsuit, and that child's parents had every right to consider one. A child injured due to negligence was a serious issue, and upper management couldn't ignore it. They were well aware of the risk, as everyone had been voicing concerns from the beginning. When the situation reached the higher-ups, I can only imagine what was discussed. Miraculously, within 2 days of the child's accident, an anti-slip surface was added to the brick pavement. This likely cost more than if it had been installed during the summer. The barriers were removed, and the volume of paper accident and incident reports significantly decreased. They also finally installed tablet devices, allowing us to complete reports without leaving our positions. Our lives became a bit easier. Upper management received a wake-up call, and that child now has a story for the future. I'd love to say that upper management learned their lesson and took our feedback to heart for future projects, but expecting that is like hoping a pet won't misbehave after the first correction. I no longer work there for unrelated reasons, and many who joined in the act of strategic compliance have since moved on. But for almost 3 remarkable months, our department worked together in a way that I hadn't seen before or since. Story 7. I'm a high school English teacher, and I have 2 major annoyances when it comes to students completing assignments. First, many students don't read or listen to directions. I provide written instructions on their assignment papers and read them aloud, yet I still have students asking me, "What are we doing?" This is no big deal, though it's a fairly common issue teachers deal with. However, the real problem I'm facing is students cheating on writing assignments by using artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT. I'm quite good at spotting essays generated by artificial intelligence, but the trouble is that when I confront students, they deny it, acting outraged even though we both know they're pretending. Typically, I just give them a score of 0 and move on. However, there's always the risk that a student might escalate the issue to the school administration, and I'm not sure I'd get support. It's difficult to prove an essay was created by artificial intelligence, and nowadays, administrators are more inclined to side with students. So, I came up with a plan. I assigned an open-ended creative writing task. The instructions were simply to write a story about anything you want, and then answer a few questions about the story. Here's the thing, when you ask ChatGPT to tell a story, it often produces a specific story about a girl named Alara who lives in the woods. The story usually starts with something like, once upon a time, in a small village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a young woman named Alara. She was known throughout the village for her curiosity and sense of adventure, always eager to explore the world beyond the familiar paths of her home. So, in slightly smaller print below the instructions, I added a line that read, "If your main character's name is Alara, minus 99 points." Sure enough, a couple of students submitted stories about a girl named Alara living in the woods. When I returned their papers with a grade of 1/100th, because I find that it has a stronger effect than a 0, the students predictably asked why. All I had to do was point to the instructions they hadn't read. There was no need to mention artificial intelligence. We both knew what had happened. Edit. For those mentioning they tried ChatGPT and received a different story or name. I'm not sure why it varies. All I know is that I consistently get the same story, and so do my students. The paragraph I shared in this post was directly copied from ChatGPT. I discovered this pattern when a student submitted that identical story earlier in the year for a different creative writing assignment.